If you've ever messed with any kind of dark genre like metal or goth or dark synth, an emotion that you get to play with that you don't really get to play with in other genres is fear, like terror, uneasiness. A lot of people are often drawn to those genres because it allows them to re-examine that emotion that's typically seen as like a bad thing or they haven't had control over. But how do we make things sound scary? How do we elicit those feelings of fear? So one of the most important things is to not have a grounding, safe instrument, like a vocal. As soon as you hear a vocal, like, okay, I know how to handle this. I can do this. Even if it's a weird vocal, you're like, okay. Or like a kick and a snare. Okay, boom, I can do this. Especially if it's a real drum. We want to stay mostly away from real instruments. And if we do, we want them to be kind of artificial machine-like and this inhuman feel. Because like if you watch like a lot of horror movies, a lot of the monsters are scary because they're unreasonable. You can't talk to them. You can't logic at them. They're just coming. They just do what they're going to do. And how do we create that feeling of this machine inhuman feel? So let's check out this track. This is an intro I wrote for the set of one of my bands, and I wanted to create that feeling of uneasiness. So the driving element in this is this huge bass. So there's actually a kick drum baked into it. Real short. I just really wanted that sound at the front of it. I'm running through a bunch of random effects in the sense that I want you to move around and just have this chaotic all over the place. But it's all going before the distortion, because the distortion is going to take whatever you have, especially something really gnarly, it's going to create a bunch of weird harmonics on top of it, which has this unpredictable feel. So that's a cool sound too, but like that's kind of without all of those modulation effects on it. So we're hopping all those modulation effects and just driving into this distortion. And to keep it from being imperceptible noise, I'm actually monoing under 100 but I want everything above 160 hertz having the time of its life over here. And I have that huge pump sound. There's not even like a big four to the floor. You can hear it, but it's almost like there's the absence of the beat. It's almost like playing around it. You're like, Can you drive a little harder so I can follow you? It's like, no, I'm going to like deprive you of the one every single time. But the kind of the core percussive element is actually this. And so I don't really have like or any like a kick and snare. This is what is driving you. First of all, the notes I'm playing are pretty weird. I intentionally throw some major thirds and minor thirds in there, but the rhythm is very constant because I want this to be mechanically perfect over and just looping and looping and looping. So your brain's going to instinctively grab to that because this thing that's repeating. It's the rhythmic element, and part of what makes that sound a little uneasy is I'm doing what's called a vibrato, which is like when a singer does that, they warble their pitch, but I'm actually doing two different vibratos just on the left and the right. So I'm slowly like detuning the left and the right back in and out, not together. They're completely doing their own thing independent of each other. So the main sound is still staying in pitch, but there's 33% on each side that are out of pitch. So I'm playing with things that are supposed to be safe. And as it builds, it gets worse. So we're at this point right here. It gets bussed to this separate sound. And this is just a whole instrument. It's not even the right notes. It's actually intentionally the same rhythm, and it's very wide. It's super out here and very noisy. And you'll notice that this is a distortion effect here, but I'm actually turning the mix of how much distortion, and then I'm turning up the volume, and I'm turning up the pitch. And you just hear it stringing against itself. You're like, oh my God, like release this, creating this tension. And I do something similar on that main synth. On this guy, on the last measure, I actually violate the notes. So you'll hear there. Down, down, down. And so like the one thing you were kind of holding on was that repetition, even those weird notes. So anyway, setting these conventions and give you something safe to hold on to and then slowly taking it away from you. So what I actually have is a pitch shifter that turns on just at the very end. So I still keep the original, but I add other parts of it that are swelling up. You're like, oh my God, what notes are you anymore? It's this very, very tense thing. You give it enough rhythmic elements, you give it enough predictability, and you're like, let's slowly take that away from them. So what I also want to do is really create this anticipation and uneasiness and these like little bits of tension. And a lot of that is I'm sliding up. So like right here. See this? Actually, that sound. What I do is I really just it's this screechy metal sound. So that sound is already dissonant and tense. I use that as the swell. Let's literally use scraping metal. That's some spoopy shit, man. And then I do something similar here, which is it's just more little metal things that I'm sweeping in and out of. And what I do for percussion, because that kick's not very loud, I can't rely on that, and I still need to see this to be driving. The whole purpose of that bass is kind of it deprives you of the one. So I have this humming noise, and that's all squished together with these impacts. They're kind of like trailer sounds that you're like, in a world. Those are like pushed together, and I want that sense of straining, like your ear can't perceive how much is going because it's just so big. So I have a couple of little clinks and clanks and factory noises, and they're not loud. They are not comfortable though. And so that's going on the whole time. And on top of that, I actually play with some of those swells that we have. I keep the reverb going infinitely. It's just staying there. It's this like drony metallic sound that just is just huge. It gives this feeling of depth. I want you to feel small. I want you to feel uneasy. I want you to look behind your back when you're listening to that. It's like when you hear a huge explosion, like your ear can't contemplate it. So we can just fake that. So we're playing on some tricks that the ears create, like creating a sense of just depth and nothingness, and it just trails on because there's nothing there to stop it. And on top of that, the one actual real instrument that I put in here starts with like this really heavy guitar, whatever noise is in there, and I distort it really heavily. Now it's just the carcass of it. It's just the leftover inhuman remains of it. And then I do have a little drum beat where yeah, some punchy drums at the end. Just build that with everything. Oh God.